What is going on, you guys? My name is Daniel and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going over a beginner's guide to photography for the Canon entry-level M50 here. The M50 is wonderful in the way that it is relatively cheap for a very good quality camera. It is small, lightweight, and ergonomic. I never feel like I'm going to drop this thing. It's wonderful. It has all the capabilities that you're going to need and could expect from a regular complimentary DSLR, and it sports its own lineup of lenses. We're going to be covering some of the basics of photography as we go through the functions and use of the M50 today, so this is a very beginner's guide and should help some of you out as you are trying to learn and figure out your camera. If I skim over something or you have a question about the M50 that just wasn't covered in this video, don't forget to throw it down in the comment section and I will get to it as quickly as possible. For starters, the battery is on the bottom of the M50 and the SD card is located right next to it. The on switch is located right next to this dial, which also chooses the functions of the camera. Before we get into the elementary part of photography, we're going to go over the auto mode. It has a pretty easy to use setup with the bottom right hand corner determining what type of photo you want to be taking in very, very basic terms. If you want background blur, brightness, if you want the low light or contrast, and so on and so forth. And you just simply press on the button in the right hand corner and you can toggle through those and you should be able to understand anything on that. Well, you can turn on a few different settings: low speed continuous, high speed continuous, taking a self timer, a 2-second timer which is usually used for longer shutters, and then a continuous shot. So after it counts down it will take 5 shots, which is probably one of the most useful things as far as the timer goes. As well, there will be a histogram on the top right, which, if you don't understand, pretty much shows you how much bright pixels and dark pixels are in your image. So if all of the graph is on one side to the left, that means that it's going to be a very dark image, and underexposed or all the way on the right hand side is going to be a very bright. To some of the more basic items and the triangle of taking photos, you have 3 different parts of it, which is your sensor, your aperture, which is controlled by your lens, and the shutter speed, which is how long the sensor is exposed for. These are the 3 basic things that you're going to be controlling with the camera to get certain types of photos. We're going to start with the most basic, which is ISO, and that's how sensitive your camera's sensor is going to be. So if it is darker, you're going to want to increase the ISO, and that goes in increments of 100, 200, 400, 800, and 1600. Going further on beyond that is going to introduce a lot more grain into your photos. And in a moment I will give you some very basic guidelines on settings to use in outdoors and indoors after I go through this. Next up is the f-stop, and that's how constricted the aperture is. The wider the aperture, the more light that comes in, the more background blur that happens. So the way to think about this to keep it super simple is you have your camera and then there is a line of Fs going out of it. You are then selecting how many of these Fs you would like to be in focus. If you choose only 3 of them, only 3 of them are going to be in focus. If you choose to have 10 of them, 10 of them are going to be in focus. And the fewer you have in focus, the more light you are letting into the camera. And the last piece of this is the shutter speed, and is for how long you are allowing the image to be exposed to the sensor before it completely gets cut off. This can allow you to freeze motion, so somebody running or a soccer match or something like that, and actually stop that image. Or having a longer exposure will allow more light in and allows you to get photos which have like streaking headlights. If you have any further questions, don't forget to ask them down below in the comment section. And moving on to the next 3, which is TV, and that is your shutter speed, so controlling how fast it is, and the camera will be controlling ISO and how open or closed the aperture is. This gives you the flexibility to not have to worry about the settings and still be able to put your aperture about where you want to freeze the image. It is measured in hundredths of a second. 1/100th of a second is how long about an average photo will take. And freezing motion usually happens at 2/50th of a second. For longer exposures where you'll want to put your camera on a tripod, you can drop the shutter down to almost 30 seconds, and that's about as long as it will let you do it for. Next up is AV, which is aperture priority, which is probably the most common I used to use before I went on to full manual. Aperture priority allows you to decide what aperture you want it at so that you can get X amount of blur that you are looking for. The camera will then control the ISO and the shutter speed. You can also take it off the manual ISO and adjust that on your own if you so desire. Like I said, this is you selecting how much of the image is blurred from your focus point. Moving on to manual, you are then controlling all three of these settings: the ISO, aperture, which is measured in f-stops, and the shutter speed. This gives you the greatest control over your camera as you take pictures, but is also the most difficult to start with. I recommend for a new photographer getting on the AV mode and letting the camera control the shutter speed and the ISO. Some of the basics for settings that you're going to want to use going outside is ISO at 100, shutter speed at 120, and the f-stop at about 4. To adjust this, if it is too bright outside, just go ahead and bump the shutter speed up to 4,000 if you have to. While shooting inside, the lowest aperture you can do is usually best, as it allows the most light to come in. As well, you can shoot down to 80th of a second, and at 800 ISO is a good starting point. Pushing it past about 16 is going to start introducing a lot of grain into your image, but since it's photography, you can usually get away with more grain, and also post-production can remove a lot of that as well. To get the most out of your photography, you're going to want to shoot in RAW settings. However, if you don't have access to Lightroom or another editing software, you're going to be unable to use these RAW files for anything, and you're better off just shooting in JPEG if you don't have a way to actually edit them. So this has been a beginner's guide to photography with the M50. If you have any questions, once again, throw them down in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll be coming out with new content every day for the M50 this upcoming week and potentially into the next month. Thank you for watching. My name is Daniel. Take care.